Good morning, everybody. Glad to have you here today. If you want to follow along, I will be looking at the first chapter of James, starting in the 14th verse. James chapter 1, beginning in verse 14. There we have these words. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then, when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. Do not err, my beloved brethren. So, we continue to look at the issue of temptation, and James makes very clear clears up something that for many people is a misconception. You may remember, you don't hear it much anymore, but it used to be shirts, or you would hear people say, well, the devil made me do it. And I'm sure people still say that, but James makes it very clear that the issue is you may be tempted, but you're drawn away of your own lust. And again, we see that all the way back to the original sin with Adam and Eve. When they fell into sin, God asked Adam what happened. He says, Eve made me do it. When the woman, so when God asked Eve, what'd you do? He said, well, the serpent made me do it. And so we've from the very beginning, we have looked for excuses for our sin and tried to justify our behavior and calm down our conscience. But James reminds us here. He says that doesn't work. He says you ultimately make the decision. You make the choice. The temptation may have been there, but you were the one who made the decision based on your own lust. And the simple truth is, Satan cannot make you sin, but he knows your weakness. I've used this illustration before in preaching. Some of you who are part of our church have heard me talk about this. We're often tempted to overeat, um, and but you could put a 55-gallon drum of pickled beets in front of me, and I will not be tempted, not only to not overeat, I won't be tempted to eat because I can't stand pickled beets. Now, on the other hand, if you put a cupcake or a cookie, then I'm going to be tempted. Satan knows each one of us, and there's probably somebody out there who would be tempted by that 55-gallon drum of pickled beets. Satan knows each one of us, and he studies us, and he knows exactly how to lure us in. He knows what bait to put in front of us, just as a good fisherman knows if the water's cloudy, or if it's cold, or if it's warm, what bait to use for which fish. Satan knows how to lure us in, but ultimately, the fish makes the decision to bite the hook. And the same is what James is saying here of our falling into temptation. We make the final decision. We make the final choice of, excuse me, of whether or not to fall into that sin. And so he tells us to be cautious, is his warning, that we know that temptation is there, and we know our own weaknesses, and therefore he's saying we guard against that falling into that trap of temptation. And it's a good warning for us today as we go through the day. There are going to be things dangled in front of us. There's going to be temptation dangled out there, and but Satan can't make us step into that sin. We have to, through our own lust, we make that sin. And so he says, here's what happens. He says, when that lust is conceived, he says it bring forth sin. Sin was finished, bring forth death. He says that's the ultimate result of our decisions. Do not err, my beloved brethren. My prayer for us all today, that we'll be aware of temptation, aware of our own weaknesses, and that we will be cautious not to err, my beloved brethren. You have a good day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning.